spare Rizz, ma'am? Romantic relationships are not a common theme on SpongeBob, but there are plenty of episodes that do give us a look into the love life of our favorite undersea critters. The first of these is Season 2, Episode 16, Krusty Love. Mrs. Puff visits the Krusty Krab for lunch, and Mr. Krabs immediately starts bugging. It leads to this hilarious scene where SpongeBob is trying to introduce his boss to his boating instructor, which is a pretty funny situation enough as it is. But of course, this is SpongeBob, so it gets way funnier. Mr. Krabs just immediately shows off his impeccable Rizz. He just starts uttering complete and utter gibberish, and you know what, Mr. Krabs, like, we've all been there, okay? We get it. Girls can be kind of scary sometimes. It's all good. That was kind of an embarrassing showing, but, you know, we'll give you a pass. Everybody gets one. That being said, Rizz, like Mr. Krabs' claws, is not just for attracting mates. It's also about being a good leader, having the ability to inspire people and bring people together. Your amount of Rizz directly correlates to how good you are at persuading people, basically. At least that's basically how it works in Dungeons & Dragons, so that's kind of what I'm going off. So let's see if Mr. Krabs can make up for his lack of love life with inspiring leadership as a boss. In the Season 3 episode Clams, we see Eugene at his worst. Upon earning his $1,000,000th, he takes Squidward and SpongeBob on a fishing trip. Naturally, Eugene quickly loses the dollar as SpongeBob accidentally tears it off his pants, and then a giant clam eats it, as one might expect from the name of the episode. Also, can I just point out for a second that they exist entirely underwater, and yet they're still on a boat that is on water that's like clearly meant to be like an ocean, although I think Squidward actually refers to it as a lagoon, but whatever. Also, boats are cars, but they're also boats? This is a topic for another episode. Anyway, at this point, Mr. Krabs goes completely insane. For the rest of the episode, he becomes extremely intimidating and just downright scary as he tries to force Squidward and SpongeBob into helping him get his dollar back. He even starts throwing like all their food overboard so that they are forced to help, but I don't know. I digress. While intimidation can be a useful strategy for getting people to do what you want, it does not work in this case. He does not win over SpongeBob and Squidward. In fact, they just try tricking him into getting out of it. So, as you can see, Mr. Krabs is not very inspiring as a boss or as a leader. While fear and intimidation can certainly build a lot of power and influence, a la Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter, when Mr. Krabs tries it, it just kinda doesn't work. Luckily for our favorite crab, though, there are some redeeming moments for his Rizz later in the series. Following Krusty Love, his relationship with Mrs. Puff does become a long-running theme on the show, albeit one that they don't reference too often, but it does still come up. And while it is not exactly clear what their relationship status is, we do get a pretty big update in the Season 10 episode Whirly Brains, which is not really my favorite episode, but this is a little bit of lore that is relevant to this video. In the episode, Krabs openly says that the two of them have been together for 16 years. So, that's something. However, he also reveals that the two of them have never even kissed. To be dating somebody for 16 years and to never even kiss them, like, what are you doing, Mr. Krabs? However, in the episode, they do correct that. So, good job, Mr. Krabs. Overall, I'll give Mr. Krabs 1.2 Rizz. Hey guys, editor Sponge Historian here. So I was just going over the actual footage for Whirly Brain again as I was clipping it to put in this video. And as it turns out, Krabs and Mrs. Puff actually don't kiss. So yeah, that part was entirely wrong. I dropped the ball on that one, but I'm too lazy to actually just like cut all that stuff out. So instead of just putting that episode in, I'm just gonna play some more of Krusty Love, which honestly I feel like is a win for everybody because that's just like an infinitely better episode, anyways. But yeah, I am gonna have to subtract some Rizz from Eugene. So I think I'm gonna subtract 0.29. I feel like the next most logical character to talk about after Mr. Krabs would be his arch nemesis, Plankton. Right off the bat, Plankton has some pretty serious nerfs that he's dealing with, okay? First of all, his name is Sheldon. Sorry, Plankton, but it's kind of hard to rizz anybody up with a name like Sheldon. Especially in a post-Big Bang Theory world, okay? That's just the reality that we live in. I know that Sheldon pre-exists Big Bang Theory, but that's the world we all live in now, okay? That brings me to my next point, which is Plankton's computer wife, Karen. As we learned in the first SpongeBob movie, Karen never agreed to be his wife. Although there are episodes later in the series that kind of contradict this. Again, that's something I'll probably talk about in a later video. But let's just assume that the first established lore, she never agreed to be his wife. He built her. Then like, okay, that's what we're working off in this video. And that would mean that Plankton doesn't really have any Rizz, right? That's basically he just built robot wife, right? I mean, that's what you would do if you have no Rizz. Now, obviously, Plankton spends most of his time on the show trying to steal the secret formula. He doesn't really leave the chum bucket too often, other than to go to the Krusty Krab to try and steal the formula. It's only like 50 feet away, but given how tall he is, it's like a 5-mile round trip. So, like, good for you, King. Get your workout in. Although most of the time, he gets like flung back to the chum bucket, so he's only really doing half of that trip on foot. But I digress. One of his trips to the Krusty Krab, though, comes in the season 4 episode Enemies-in-Law, where he discovers Mr. Krabs' mom and immediately just has a crush for her. Plankton does go through a lot of effort to impress Mrs. Krabs in this episode. It honestly is pretty impressive, and it works. However, once Plankton discovers that this is Mrs. Krabs, it immediately just turns into another one of his plots to get the secret formula. Because of course, Mrs. Krabs knows the secret formula. So if they can get married, then, you know, he would have access to it. So naturally, Plankton proposes to her at the end of the episode, which is a pretty Rizzless maneuver, actually, just to propose to somebody after you've known them for like 11 minutes. Yeah, like, don't do that. That being said, though, Plankton does have some redeeming moments, like Mr. Krabs later in the series. In the season 6 episode, Single Cell Anniversary, which is actually one of my favorites from the season, Karen offers to give Plankton the secret formula, which she got just by buying a Krabby Patty, basically. But he has to get her something in return because he forgot their anniversary. In fact, this is one of those episodes I was talking about earlier where there's a contradiction, because in this episode, Karen does say that they got married and it was a choice, so who knows what's going on. It's just one of those inconsistencies. Now, I'm not sure why Plankton couldn't just, like, I don't know, like, go into her files, open up, you know, documents, and, like, search for that. But obviously the plot wouldn't be very satisfying if that was the case. So we end up seeing SpongeBob, and then later Patrick kind of randomly joins, help him do something nice for her. And that they do. He, like, writes and performs this song for her. It's really sweet, and it works, and she blows up. So, you know, Plankton loses, like always. Now, just because he didn't get the result he wanted in this episode, it doesn't mean he didn't show a little bit of Rizz. So I'll give Plankton 2 8.4. Next up, we have Bikini Bottom's grouchiest resident, Squidward. Hey now, be nice to Squidward. Unfortunately, there isn't really a lot of material to work with for Squiddy, as there's only really one episode where we see him have any kind of love interest, and that is the Season 7 episode, Love That Squid. This episode is basically just a copy-paste version of Krusty Love, except instead of Mr. Krabs, it's Squidward. I mean, it's kind of lazy, to be honest, but you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's not terrible. It's one of the better episodes from Season 7, I think. Instead of Mrs. Puff, we have a female squid named Squilvia, because, of course. Just like Mr. Krabs, though, Squidward completely shuts down. Now, he shuts down in a different way, though. Instead of just blabbering complete nonsense, he literally just cannot say words, which is better, I guess? But once again, SpongeBob comes to the rescue, is the ultimate wingman, and gets him a date with her. After she leaves, though, this is when we learn exactly how long it's been since Squidward has been on a date, which is a little bit shocking, but also not really shocking because, you know, it's Squidward. Who would want to date that guy? Just because Squidward hasn't been on a date since color television was invented doesn't mean he doesn't have any Rizz. For all we know, he could have been practicing celibacy. But yeah, this whole interaction with Squilvia kind of speaks for itself. The only other instance I can think of where Squidward is genuinely trying to Rizz somebody up, and now, again, there could be some stuff in like the latest seasons that I haven't seen because I haven't caught up with all of that yet. But anyways, the Season 4 episode, That's No Lady. The one where Patrick disguises himself as a girl because he thinks some guy is trying to run him out of town. Both Squidward and Mr. Krabs start bugging over Patricia because, like, she's really hot. I don't know. This is... What am I even doing? But as a result, Squidward does actively try to woo Patrick throughout the rest of the episode. And honestly, he doesn't do a terrible job at it. Like, he brings out the clarinet and actually plays something that doesn't suck. Sounds pretty decent. I don't know that being good at clarinet is really a good way to Rizz somebody up, but it's worth a shot. Like, it's worth a shot. Like, I'm not going to take points away for him for it. And he certainly does come across as very confident in this episode, which is very unusual, so he gets points there as well. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention Handsome Squidward. This is a more powerful version of the cephalopod, basically like a Pokemon evolution, but instead of gaining new moves and more hit points and stuff, he just gets hotter. Apparently, Bikini Bottomites cannot control themselves when they see just how hot he can get. So he's literally just projected into celebrity status as the town's hot guy. And he is constantly getting harassed by the entire town for the rest of the episode. So even if he's not trying, like, he's got a flock of people around him. That's kind of Rizz. Squidward doesn't really start doing anything differently in this episode other than being hot. So I don't want to give him too many points for it, especially since at the end of the episode he returns to normal and nobody cares anymore. But yeah, and you know, Squidward is kind of a tough one to grade because it seems like his Rizz really varies depending on his mood. If he's feeling good and confident, he can Rizz you up, but if he's just in his normal, grouchy, curmudgeon-y mood, which he's in, like, you know, 98, 99% of the time, then he doesn't really have any Rizz. But overall, I'll give him 3. Okay? He gets 3. Now, I think I've gone as far as I can into this video without addressing the elephant in the room. Of course, that is SpongeBob himself. SpongeBob is a pretty unique character in the show in that we never really see any romantic inclination from him whatsoever. This is by design. At least that's what I've gathered, what I've been told. Supposedly, at least, Steven Hillenburg never wanted SpongeBob to have romantic relationships in the show. But I could be wrong about that. You know, you can correct me in the comments down below if I'm wrong. But as I discussed with Mr. Krabs, Rizz is not just about attracting mates. It's also about leadership, inspiration, and like, you know, just the general ability to get people to do stuff for you. All qualities that SpongeBob shows throughout the show. Perhaps the best example of this, though, is my all-time favorite episode. In case you couldn't tell. Band Geeks. This episode is so iconic that I'm sure I do not need to explain the plot to any of you, but I'm gonna do that anyways because this is my video. This is the episode where we get introduced to Squidward's arch nemesis, Squilliam Fancyson. Squilliam reveals that he is supposed to play with his band at the Bubble Bowl, but something came up and he can't do it. So he asks Squidward to fill in for him, knowing very well that Squidward does not have a band. However, Squidward defies Squilliam, declares that he does have a band, and then scrambles like all heck to put one together. This brings all of Bikini Bottom's most notable residents together in one episode, which is kind of rare and nice to see. Everyone from Mr. Krabs to Larry the Lobster, and some of the more frequently used background characters in the early seasons, and even Mrs. Puff. However, after a quick montage of a couple of days of Squidward trying to teach everybody how to be a marching band, they are still nowhere near ready to perform. They basically have not improved at all. So then, Squidward leaves the last practice, defeated, the day before the Bubble Bowl, and he says, "Don't even show up. I'll just tell him you died in a marching accident." Which is one of my favorite lines from the show, for the record. But that is not the end of the episode. Somebody stands up for Squidward. Somebody becomes a hero. Of course, it's SpongeBob. SpongeBob rallies everybody together, somehow teaches everybody how to be good musicians, and they rock the Bubble Bowl. They show up, they're all wearing their uniforms, and they put on a show that none of us have ever forgotten. Because, unlike Squidward, SpongeBob is an effective leader. Furthermore, he's able to do all this work in just one night. That would have taken an incredible amount of leadership, technical ability, and charisma.
Charisma? Whee!
And there are plenty of other instances throughout the show where SpongeBob is just being a good leader, where he literally saves Bikini Bottom, becomes a hero to the entire town, or the second movie, where he saves Bikini Bottom, but with more help from his friends this time. Overall, I'll give SpongeBob 7.7 good noodle stars. We can't bring SpongeBob into this without also discussing his best friend, Patrick. Like SpongeBob, Patrick never really has any serious romantic story arcs throughout the show, with one notable exception, Princess Mindy from the first SpongeBob movie. Patrick is clearly smitten by her from the very first time he sees her. I mean, he's not exactly subtle about it. And throughout the rest of the movie, he continues to clearly just gush over her whenever she is in his presence. In fact, one of my favorite SpongeBob moments of all time is when SpongeBob and Patrick have just given up. They can't do it anymore. And then that's when they run into Mindy, and Patrick is lying down with his pants around his ankles, and he hears SpongeBob say, "Mindy," and he pulls his pants up real quick, and he's like, "Did you see my underwear?" "No, Patrick." "Did you want to?" I quote that all the freaking time. And you know what? Honestly, like, I could think of a worse. I could see how that could have gotten worse. So, you know, we'll give Patrick a little bit of Rizz for that. In the season 6 episode Sunbleached, we see Patrick at his best, at least when it comes to Rizz. Him and SpongeBob are trying to get tan so they can go to the shindig with that, like, big tan guy that shows up at the lagoon. And so, you know, they convert Patrick's rock into a tanning bed. Works perfectly for Patrick because, you know, he's only in there for a few seconds. And as soon as he gets out of it, a group of ladyfish drive up and start fawning over him because being tan equals being hot, right? And he basically doesn't even say a single word. He just gets in the car and they are off, you know, and he's got a bunch of pretty ladyfish, you know, gaggling around him. So it's hard to argue with that. Now, if you look at it from the leadership and that blah blah blah, that angle, like, yeah, Patrick isn't exactly the smartest and isn't necessarily a great leader. But when the Alaskan bullworm attacks, he does somehow manage to convince everybody to just take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else. So, you know, he can convince a crowd sometimes. So I'll give Patrick 4 Rizz. By this point, we have pretty much covered everybody in the main cast that I wanted to talk about, but there are a few side characters that I want to mention as well. The first of these is, of course, the aforementioned Squilliam Fancyson. Squilliam doesn't really have that many appearances on the show. In fact, he's only listed as being in 9 episodes, most of which are just like a background role. However, it is pretty clear from the very beginning that he is meant to just be, you know, the successful, like, anti-Squidward, basically. He's everything Squidward isn't. So Squidward has no Rizz, Squilliam has all the Rizz. He's portrayed as wealthy, successful, and charming, and he's always got an entourage around him. So people just naturally gravitate towards him. That's kind of a symptom of Rizz. I mean, even Squidward can't really resist him. In the episode Squilliam Returns, we get one of my favorite moments of SpongeBob, or really any show all time, and I think you guys probably already know where I'm going with this. You know, when Squidward first runs into him and he's like, don't be intimidated by him, Squiddy. Just imagine him in his underwear. Oh no, he's hot! Yeah, that one, yeah, I just had to throw it in there, sorry. And of course, by the end of the episode, Squilliam ends up winning and has that smug look on his face and gets to just walk out with his entourage as Squidward is shoved back into reality. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Squilliam has a pretty healthy amount of Rizz, but maybe he's not the ultimate Rizzler of Bikini Bottom. I'll give him 6.5. Oh no, he's hot! Finally, we have Larry the Lobster. Larry seems to have no problems whatsoever attracting the ladies of Bikini Bottom. He's cool, confident, just nonchalant. He's got it going on. This is noticeable from the very first episode he's in, Ripped Pants. Whenever he's on the beach, he seems to have girls with him, and he's always impressing the people around him. This continues basically through every episode that he's in, at least in the early seasons. He kind of becomes a more fleshed out character later in the show, as I've referenced maybe in this video. I can't even remember. The real cherry on top, though, for Larry, I feel like comes in the season 6 episode, A Life in a Day. This one honestly really feels like the beginning of the Flanderization of Larry. In particular, is impressed by Larry and suddenly feels obligated to just copy him. So he starts putting himself in increasingly dangerous situations. Why? Because hurting yourself is cool and will attract girls, right? This episode isn't really that deep. Like, I don't think they're really trying to teach us to live like Larry, you know. It does kind of play into the, like, bad guys are a cool trope, but, you know, it is what it is. It's just kind of silly. With all that being said, Larry is clearly the Rizz god of Bikini Bottom. I'll give him 8.7. And so, the winner is Larry the lobster! Right?
Wrong!
The real Rizzler of Bikini Bottom is none other than Gary the Snail. He's adorable, smart, and confident, themes that are present throughout the show. This begins with the Season 1 episode, Culture Shock. Gary has a small role in the episode, but he wows the crowd at the Krusty Krab with his poetry, clearly impressing Sandy. And this is just a small taste of what's to come for him. A few episodes later, in Sleepy Time, we find out that Gary is actually a complicated and very smart character, not just a snail. SpongeBob visits his friends' dreams, including Gary, and clearly, Gary sees himself as this very smart, sophisticated, confident kind of guy just based off that dream. So that's another pretty strong point in his favor. He also has another major display of Rizz in the Season 3 episode, The Great Snail Race. This episode is actually, honestly, kind of a Squidward episode, even though he doesn't get the most screen time. Of course, he buys the purebred snail, Snelly, and tells SpongeBob and Patrick that he's entering her into the race, and they're gonna win. SpongeBob immediately becomes jealous and whips Gary into shape so that he can put Gary into the race. And basically that's most of the episode. It's just like a training montage where SpongeBob becomes that one dad at the Little League game yelling at the ump when it's like, you know, an 8-year-old kid throwing and it's like 6 inches outside and he calls it a strike. But I digress. By the time the race actually comes around, Gary is completely wiped out. He's got nothing left, nothing in the tank. I mean, he's just like, he's practically dead already. And so the race starts, Snelly zooms out of the starting gate, and Gary is just laying there until SpongeBob really starts getting on his case again, starts yelling at him, and eventually he starts moving, probably out of fear more than anything else. And he just starts going and going until he basically literally blows up. As that happens, just as Snelly is about to win the race, she sees what is going on and turns back to comfort him. And of course, Gary immediately is much better, and the two snails go off together. We don't get another big Gary episode until the Season 7 episode, Gary in Love. In this episode, SpongeBob takes Gary to a snail park where he quickly meets and apparently falls in love with another snail named Mary, who suspiciously looks like Snelly, by the way. However, Mary already had a boyfriend, a much bigger and tougher looking snail. Despite this, Mary basically rejects him to be with Gary right in front of him. He literally stole his girl right in front of him, in public. Unfortunately, the episode does end with Mary going away with her owner and another snail after her owner finds her long-lost love. But, you know, that's kind of beside the point, really. Gary has infinite Rizz. If you like this video and are a big fan of SpongeBob, do be sure to subscribe with notifications turned on. This is just the beginning of this channel. We got lots more content headed your way in the very near future, and I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of a few of our upcoming videos. So please enjoy. I'll catch you next time. And one last thing, never forget to be yourself. Granted, obviously, I don't remember when this episode came out because I was 6 weeks old, literally shitting and sleeping and crying and pissing and crying. Felicitations, malefactors! I am endeavoring to misappropriate the formula for affordable comestibles! Who will join me? You have to be confident with who you are. If you're a weirdo, who cares? SpongeBob is a weirdo. Everybody loves him. Just be authentically yourself, and you will find the people that like you. Or, in a lot of cases, they will find you. Also, a much lesser, remembered moment, I think, but to me, a moment that is basically just as iconic is when Plankton asks if instruments of torture count. Don't be intimidated, Squidward. Try to imagine him in his underwear. Oh no, he's hot!